If you are a greater Bostonian, you live in one of the most interesting cities in the world, filled with some of the most interesting people.
A person of interest could be anyone. The person need not be among the rich and famous, although being rich and famous does not exclude someone from this title. A person of interest is someone, anyone, with an interesting story.
In each episode, we will interview a person whose life has had its dramas. It could be you. You are probably an interesting person. You have undoubtedly had a life filled with dramatic moments, both big and small.
If you would like us to interview you, please contact us. If not, please listen to your neighbors, friends, and community members that we interview and be inspired by the wonders of their life stories. And now for our guest.
Emily Prenner is an amazing example of flexible brain development. She attended MIT, majoring in theater and chemistry. She worked for a Wall Street firm in New York City, and after 9/11 destroyed the data system that was in one of the towers, she helped put it back together in a very timely way. In Newton, she has held many jobs related to the Newton schools and has recently been elected to be on the Newton School Committee for Ward 5. But the reason that she joined us in this podcast is that she was an adopted child who searched out and found her birth family after her adopted parents passed away.
Welcome to our podcast, Emily. I would like to thank you so much for coming here and for sharing your ideas and experience with us.
Emily, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Emily, we're really interested in learning more about you. Can you tell us about your background and where you grew up?
Sure. I was born in San Diego in 1971, and I was adopted when I was 5 days old to a family who lived on Long Island in New York. So I grew up in Roslyn. And I attended school there, and as you mentioned in the intro, I went to MIT. I studied chemistry and theater, and then I moved back to New York City, and I met my former husband, and we lived in New York for a while. I had my son there, and then my husband was offered a corporate transfer, and we moved to Boston. I had my daughter, and I have been in Newton for the last 16 years.
Could you tell us a little about your family? How comfortable did you feel in that family?
They're my family. You can't feel more comfortable than that. Despite the fact that they were my adoptive parents, they are my parents. They were my parents. They unfortunately did both pass away. And, I had a wonderful, loving, and complicated relationship with my parents, as I think most children have. Hopefully loving, but also complicated relationships with their parents and their family. I also have a sister who is 4 years older than I am. She was not adopted.
Emily, when did you find out that you were adopted? And did this information change your attitude towards your parents?
I don't think I can remember a time when I didn't know that I was adopted. I have known my entire life that I was adopted. And there was no aha moment. There was no, you do hear stories about people who don't find out until they're much older, and then that completely changes their view and perspective of their adoptive parents. But again, there was no point that I can think of where I didn't know. They were very open and honest, clearly from a very young age. I had picture books about it, and I had been told my adoption story. I always remember knowing my adoption story from their perspective. That was mostly correct, but not entirely.
Would you be comfortable sharing that story?
Sure, I can tell you what my adoptive parents told me, which is that my birth mother was a teenager in California and decided to put me up for adoption, was moved to a different area of California that nobody in her family knew about it. And I was also told that my birth father had no idea that she was pregnant, and that she went to live with an aunt or a cousin or a family member in San Diego until she gave birth, and then gave me up to it for adoption, and then went back to high school with no one the wiser, supposedly. So that's what I was told.
When you were in high school or when you were in primary school, did you discuss with your friends that you were adopted, and how did they respond?
I was pretty open about it. I mean, it wasn't something that I announced to people on a regular basis. It was certainly nothing that I was ashamed of or upset about or anything like that. But I would say that all my close friends definitely knew that I was adopted. Just when we were discussing our backgrounds and who we are and where we came from. And that was true through primary school, high school, college, going forward.
Once you were able to share your family background with your friends, did you have any yearning to find your birth parents?
I think that I was always curious. Teenagers go through phases where, you love your parents, you hate your parents, you love your parents, you hate your parents. And definitely during those time periods, I never said it out loud to them, but, in my angry teenager brain would say, I'm going to find my adoptive, my birth parents, and I'm going to go live with them because I hate you. I had this crazy idea when I was younger that Sybil Shepherd was my birth mother. I was utterly convinced that Sybil Shepherd was my birth mother.
I could see the resemblance. Must be your hairstyle.
So I would say that when I was younger, I was curious, but I had parents. So, I had loving parents, and there was no real deep yearning. I wouldn't use the term yearning to find my birth parents.
Could you describe the process in which you decided to find your birth parents and your birth family?
While my parents were both alive, I just didn't really have what you described as a yearning to get more information about my birth parents. I have always been curious. This is the science nerd in me coming out. I'd always wanted to know what my medical history was, my family medical history. Everyone fills out those forms in the doctor's office, and they always have questions like, anybody in your family have cancer, heart disease, diabetes? And I always scrawled in big letters, adopted, across all those questions because I have no idea. And as I got older, and I actually reached the age that my adoptive mother first got diagnosed with breast cancer. And I was really, and I had friends and family who were going through their own medical issues. Not knowing what my medical background was really weighing on me. And so once both my parents passed away, and I think that there was a part of me that knew, especially my mother, would have been very hurt if I had started doing an active search, but I was still curious and looking around and poking around on websites to see if I could get any information. But what ultimately ended up happening was I decided to go on Ancestry DNA. You can spit in a tube or swipe your cheek and send off your DNA to Ancestry to be analyzed. And truly, it was partially for the medical reasons, but more because I don't know where in the world I'm from. Am I German? Am I Swedish? Am I French? Am I Dutch? What am I? Am I Scottish? I knew nothing. And I thought, spit in the tube. It would tell me what my ancestry profile was without truly thinking or understanding deeply that you get DNA matches when you're on Ancestry.com. And it can be from fifth cousins down to a parent. And so I spit in the tube. This was 2012, about 6 months after my mom passed away. And I got my results. And for anybody who's curious, I am, in fact, German, Dutch, and a little Swedish, and definitely Irish, Scottish. So that's my background there. But I started getting matches. There's every time you get a match, you get an email from Ancestry.com saying, hey, you have new DNA matches. You can look at their family tree, and there were definitely some names that were overlapping, and I always thought, this is really interesting. I wonder if I'm going to get a little information about maybe a last name for who my birth parents are, family. And so what ended up happening was I made a match for a first or a second cousin. She sent me an email, because you can do that, member to member, on the website saying, hey, how are we related? This is one of those moments where I thought, I could really screw up a family right now. I mean, truly, realistically speaking. If the story that I was told, that my adoption story, was true, that nobody in that family other than my birth mother had any idea that I existed, and certainly my birth father had no idea that I was alive, I could be doing some real familial damage, and I was very nervous about responding. But I responded and I said something kind of vague, like, well, I'm adopted. I was born in California. I don't know anything about my birth family. Do you have any information? And I got a very nice response back saying, I can't talk to you right now. I'm very sorry. I have a family emergency. And I never heard from her again. So I thought, okay, I got to be super careful here because not everybody wants to have this conversation. And I totally understand that. I understand. I don't want to rock the boat. So I'm going into this really now understanding that there could be significant implications for families. So I'm chugging along and I'm getting other second cousin matches. And there are some names that are coming up a number of times.
When you got these matches, did you respond to anybody at all?
I didn't respond to anybody because I was afraid that something would happen. Plus, I hadn't matched with anybody who was as close as that person. And then I got another super close match, another first cousin. And I spoke to the woman and she was lovely. And I waited until she reached out to me. I sent my sort of generic, I'm adopted, can you help me? And she was super nice and said, I really don't, there might be somebody, it's this other person, it's on my mother's side of the family, don't really know, but if I think about something, I'll let you know. And we corresponded a couple times back and forth, how you doing? In November of 2018, which is a little over a year ago, I got a match on Ancestry, which is the closest match I've ever gotten, which is, I think they call it close match is the category. I kind of freaked out in a good way because I thought, oh my God, this is real. This is a real, very close relative. I looked at her family tree.
You looked on your family tree?
So Ancestry has a thing where it's a username. Most people don't use their full names. It's just so when I was communicating with people or somebody came up, it would just be like a username. And many people have public family trees. So I can click on that match and then look at their public family tree. And those don't, and for the record, those don't normally include the names of people who are living. In fact, that's usually tagged as private. And this family tree went back, 3 or 4 generations. And so in those, there were 2 names that I recognized. And actually one of them matched the lovely woman who responded to me about 6 months beforehand. And I thought, whoa, okay, here we go. And in the description of who the match could be, it was like an aunt, closer than a first cousin. And so I realized that this was my half-sister. They give you a sample family tree of different permutations that this could possibly be. And it was so obviously my half-sister. And I sat on that for 2 weeks because I didn't really know what to do with it. And so she reached out to me. She sent me a message on Ancestry and said, we're closely related. Do you have any idea how we might be related? And so I sent my generic response that said, well, I was adopted in California. I'm looking for some information. I have no idea how we're related. And within 15 minutes, I got a response saying, I'm your half-sister. I know that I have a half-sister who was born in California in 1971. I've known for my whole life that you existed. And I can't believe that we are connecting. And so we sent some messages back and forth to each other, talking about our lives and who we were. And I asked if she knew anything about my birth story. And she said, that's not really my story to tell. That's my mother's story to tell. And oh, by the way, I have a sister, so you have 2 half-sisters. So we connected on Facebook. I saw photos, and she has kids, and I have kids. And so a week later, her sister showed up as my half-sister on Ancestry DNA, and a week after that, my birth mother showed up. So science, irrefutable, totally my birth mother and my half-sister. Sisters, I should say.
When you looked on Facebook and saw what they looked like, the spectrum of people, did you see a resemblance between you and them?
Kind of. I was thinking that we would look exactly the same, but like siblings, and we're half siblings. So in some ways we have similar eyes, we have similar shaped faces. My hair is much lighter than theirs. I got a message from my birth mom, and she told me my real birth story, which is very similar to the one that my adoptive parents told me, but a little different. So from her perspective, she said the following. She said that my birth father absolutely knew that I existed. There was no question about that. He knew. And her immediate family knew. They, both parents, made the decision that she was going to go to a home for unwed mothers in another area of California, in Vista, California, which is a distance away. I didn't mention my birth parents are from Bakersfield, California. And so she had me, and my parents, my adopted parents, so confusing, too many parents. My adopted parents came down and took me on an airplane at 5 days old.
How did your adopted parents find out about you?
I was told that it was a private adoption and that they used some adoption agency in New York. And I have to imagine that they had a connection with the Home for Unwed Mothers in California. She then went back to high school, and my birth father was 2 years older than she was. Oh, I didn't mention she was 15 years old at the time. She's 15 when she had me, which is the same age as my daughter right now. And her boyfriend, who was my birth father, graduated high school, and they have no contact.
Have you had any leads to your birth father?
So I know his name. I know his name because my birth mother told me his name, and I do have some second cousin matches with the same family name on Ancestry.com. The internet is a wonderful and creepy place, so I looked up to see where he's living now. If it's the same person, it's a fairly common name.
What do you know about your birth family?
I know quite a bit about my maternal grandmother. My maternal grandmother worked in social services in Bakersfield, California, and there is a whole basically the equivalent of Children and Family Services here, building in Bakersfield that is named after her. Yeah, which is incredible. And, I feel a connection there because of my advocacy work for public education and ensuring that we protect and get the services to the kids who are the most vulnerable in our community. So I only know that because she passed away. So her actual name showed up in one of these family trees. Okay. And so I did a search. And you can search up obituaries. Mm-hmm. Obituaries are generally found all over the place. And so I saw that in her obituary, it listed who her daughter was, who happens to be my birth mother. And so that's where I got that name from initially.
What about other family members? Do you know anything about them?
Not a ton. Just to circle back to what I had said before, that lovely woman who responded to me said, if I can help in any way, let me know. This is one of those indirect familial fallout things that I didn't really intend to have happen. She reached out to me and said, hey, have you heard any information? And I said, I happen to have found my birth mother, and she's your cousin. That her mother and your mother were sisters. And she said, oh my God, I had absolutely no idea that her cousin had had a baby at all. And so I kind of inadvertently opened that can of worms, and I haven't heard anything back about how this is a horrible thing and you're a terrible person and I can't believe you did that, which is good. So I hope that there wasn't a ton of additional family fallout.
But your mother at least did share with you that the immediate family did know.
I know that my birth mother got married and had 2 kids who are my half-sisters. I know that she got divorced, and then I know that she's recently remarried and has moved to Georgia.
Now, when you got in touch, you said they received you warmly. So could you tell us a little about that?
They just were very positive and welcoming and nice. My birth mother offered to have a phone conversation with me. And it's interesting because that offer was made about 9 months ago, and I haven't called. I have mixed feelings about it. I do. Clearly, my feelings around this is complicated. On the one hand, I am thrilled. I'm excited. I did get some medical history information, which is good. I'm happy about that. And I'm thrilled that I have this other family, but there's a part of me that still feels a little weird about taking that next step forward. And I want to. And it's been 9 months, and I'm going to, just not yet.
What do you think the roadblocks are to that in your mind?
I don't want to feel like I'm betraying my adoptive parents, which is ridiculous, because I know on some level I think they would be thrilled that I have found my birth parents. at least my birth mother and that other side of the family. I have family. I don't have a lot of family from my adoptive side. So my grandfather on my father's side, he was one of 11 kids. My father is the only offspring from that generation. So I have very few cousins. I have very few immediate family, very little. And so it's cool. I've got this family. It's great. I have the second family. That's kind of the plus, and I'm very interested to learn more about them and to, particularly my half-sisters. I mean, we it's so bizarre. We like everything on Facebook. It's weird that so when I won the election, my birth mother is like one of the first people who liked my "I won, isn't this fabulous" post on Facebook. So that distance or closeness, or whichever way you would like to view that, I've been comfortable with, but I'm curious. I'm curious. It would be interesting to hear her story directly from her, and I think she hasn't pushed, which I greatly appreciate. That doesn't always happen that way. I've heard other stories from other people where, how is this going to turn out?
Are you somewhat afraid that you might be disappointed when you meet them?
I don't know if disappointed is the right word. I'm not looking for an instant family. I'm not looking to replace my adoptive parents in any way, shape, or form. There's no pressure for that. I grew up on Long Island in the suburbs of New York, and I grew up in a Jewish household, and I've charted my own path and my own course. I have no idea what would have happened if I had, I don't know where I'd be right now or who I'd be. There's a whole concept of nurture nature, and I have no idea where I would have ended up. And my birth family is awesome. I've talked to them, electronically, but still, and they're doing awesome things. One of my sisters is a social worker, and she works with special needs kids, and it's amazing. I don't know if disappointment is not the right word. It's complicated.
And your birth sisters, how old are they in relationship to you?
One is 5 years younger and one is 8 years younger.
If you had not been adopted, do you think that you pretty much would be the same person?
That goes back to nurture versus nature. The scientist in me says, my DNA is my DNA. I like to sing, and I like science, and I have a super analytical, nerdy brain, and so I wonder how much of that would be different. And then there's so much of the nurture aspect to this. So I don't know. I have no idea. I could be as fulfilled. I could be more fulfilled. I could be less fulfilled. I don't know. It's hard to tell.
You would not have met your husband.
That is true.
Your ex-husband.
Probably, definitely. I definitely
would not have had the same children.
That is true.
And so, at least that way, your life would be different.
What is that movie? I want to say it's a Gwyneth Paltrow movie where there are two stories. One is if she had caught the train and met her future relationship, and one is what would have happened if she hadn't caught the train. How would her life have been different? And so that's one of those moments.
Would you recommend that adopted children search out their birth families?
Just based on the reaction of that first person that I matched with, that I made the connection to, who clearly freaked out about the concept that there might be a secret family in her family's background, and then completely shut off communications, to the point where I was very careful when I was communicating with people who were potential family members. My suggestion is that if you do want to do this through Ancestry DNA or through any of the DNA matching services, that you need to be cognizant and aware of the fact that your questioning may have profound impact on an existing family unit. So that's my 2 cents. And again, like I said during my story previously, I was supremely cognizant and aware of the phrase "do no damage." I was trying to do as little damage as possible, while still understanding and feeling quite firmly that I have on some level a right to know who my parents are.
You finding out that you have your birth family and you have your own family right now, is this something that you've discussed with your children?
100%. And the other thing I'll say is that there are many, 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 many kids who are adopted now, and a lot of my kids' friends were adopted. So that's already on their no big deal radar because it's discussed and talked about. And in many cases, Timmy's parents don't look like Timmy. And why do Timmy's parents not look like Timmy? So having that whole conversation and diversity and what a family unit means and all those things definitely come into play. And so, yeah, my kids know. They know that I made the match. They know that I know who my birth family is.
Is there any interest in them knowing their, I'll say their maternal birth grandparents?
Not yet. I suspect it'll come. And I suspect that as my oldest gets older, he may become more curious.
You have a son and a daughter?
I do.
And how old is the daughter?
So my daughter is the younger of the two, and she's 15.
15, exactly.
Yes, that has occurred to me on many occasions when I see her acting 13, and I think, oh my God, I can't imagine being 15, and at that age, pregnant.
And at that time, was abortion an option?
I don't think so, because it was 1971.
Have you, any time during the time you were growing up, did you ever feel angry to know that your birth mother gave you up?
I don't think angry is the right word, particularly when I was much younger. Confused. My adoptive parents were my parents in every sense of the word. And I was, lucky to grow up that way. I wouldn't say angry, not angry. Curious is a good word for it, absolutely.
You never felt rejected then?
Unless I have some deep-seated thing that I have not yet dealt with during many years of therapy so far.
I'd just like to thank you so much for coming here today and for sharing this very interesting story with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Emily. And I just want to say that I know it's incredibly personal to talk about your family, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. You have been listening to Serendipity's Person of Interest, produced and directed by Tonette Terhar and Barbara John. If you have an interesting story and would like to participate in this podcast or have any helpful suggestion, email us at barbaraj.massed@gmail.com. barbaraj.massed@gmail.com. We would very much like to thank our guests and the staff at New TV, who are always more than helpful. So until our next episode, we will say goodbye. Thank you for listening.